people what their stories should be. To say that an African story is not authentic unless it has, for example, if you're Zimbabwean, unless it has the horrible things that Mugabe has done, or you can't write about homosexuality because it's not African. Instead, you have to write about the horrible wars and the poverty and the AIDS fight. You know, I just find it ridiculous. And most of all, because of the fiction writer, it seems to me that fiction is about challenging those stock ideas that we get in the news. And so that you see the headlines where it's always about war and poverty, or apparently in the case of this country, about the two men who are in Congo. And you know, it just seems to me amazingly there's a lot more going on in Congo apart from the two men. You know, if you read, what I found really interesting, and I'm really happy to be here because I find that I'm learning so much. And we had a conference earlier today, and I found it really stunning that while apparently the Norwegian press has really been covering the two men who've been charged with this crime, that it's been really difficult to get coverage for a Congolese novel. And it seems to me that, if anything, this is the time when Congolese fiction is needed in this country too, so that people start to see that there are other things, you know, that there are human beings in Congo, and that, you know, all of those things. And so, I think I said it to ramble, so I'll stop.
I'll continue a bit on this theme, because this is something that you were aware of at a very early stage. As I read, that you said that in your childhood you read children's books, and they were all about, you know, white people who ate apples and talked about the weather, and when you wrote your first little children's book when you were still a child, you also wrote about white people who ate apples and I don't know, played in the snow. So you didn't have like children's books about someone who was similar to you. Did that already then, did it anger you, or
no, I love those books. Absolutely, I mean, it didn't anger me at all. In many ways, I still have a lot of fondness for those books. I mean, I really think that literature in the end is about being human, and there are books I love that have nothing to do with Africa, and I think that is the way it should be. For me, what, as an adult, I realize is it's so important for a child in particular to have different versions, to have different stories, right? I feel that it's really important, and particularly for people who come in regions that I like to call the periphery of the world, to see themselves.
Like all of us.
Sort of metaphorical periphery. But anyway, that it's important for us to see ourselves reflected in popular culture, the popular culture that we consume. Because otherwise you then have a really distorted view. So I really felt that books had to have white people in them, because that's all I knew. And I remember when I started to write little chapbooks for my mother, and one in particular, my mother actually says she still has them, and she keeps threatening to give them to a Nigerian journalist. So everything my mother wants, I give her. But I remember one was called On Macintosh Lane, and it was about this girl called Anne, and she had blonde hair and blue eyes, and I mean, also what's, and they talked about the weather. Now, you know, you're growing up in small town Nigeria. Nobody talks about the weather. Because you just don't. Then you'd have these characters say, you know, how nice the weather is today. That's because in the English books they did that. And, you know, so no, certainly it didn't anger me at all. And a lot of those books were just very good for, you know, for enlarging my sense of the world, sort of nurturing my imagination, all of those things. What I wish and what I would like for children now, is that they have those English stories, but also stories that show people who are like them and people who do things that are familiar to them.
I know you have lots of friends in the audience, but there is also maybe someone who don't know you that well. So I would like you to, if you could tell us a little about your upbringing. We have certain similarities. We both have fathers who were teaching statistics, science parents, and grew up with lecturing parents. but could you tell us about your family and your upbringing? And yeah.
Sure. But I'm just curious. So, when you were growing up, were you expected to be good at statistics and mathematics? And were you good? Because
it was taken for granted. Yes.
Yes, it was. I grew up in a small university town, Nsukka, which is the town where Aslak is now from. And it was I really had a very happy and safe childhood. Nsukka was, and we lived on the campus. As happens in Nigeria, the university would have, so it was really sort of like a little village, really. And you had the town, but then you had the campus itself, and lecturers would live on campus. And so we had the primary school, which was for the children of the staff. We had the library, and everybody knew everybody else in that odd kind of way. And you know, I was very fortunate to be surrounded by books. We didn't have, because my father was a science person and my mother was a sort of administration, we didn't really have a lot of literary books. So we had shelves and shelves of books with titles like non-parametric methods. But my best friend's family, my best friend's father was a professor of literature. So I went to their house and they had this incredible library of books, and that's actually where I think I first read a book that's very important to me, called The African Child by Kamaralai. It was a book from my friend's father, and you know, so life was really this sort of safe, small place where, for me, life was about books. It was also about friends. It was about you know, kind of a sense that things were in order in the world. Well, until I was until really I suppose sort of the middle of the military regime of Buhari. That's when as a child, you realize that your world is changing, because that's when more and more you had students rioting, and after a while you had a situation where lecturers were no longer paid because universities were no longer funded, and then you just felt that there was a politicization, I felt, of the university that hadn't been there early, and things changed, and for me, I became aware that, you know, everything was not in order in the world, right? But it was a very happy childhood. I wouldn't have had it any other way.
And your first novel is about, among other things, a girl coming of age. It's a family story, and she grows up under very different conditions from yourself, under a very abusive father, very religious. But on the outside, he's very democratic-minded and very, morally correct. And in many of your stories, there's this conflict in some of the men being perfect on the outside and not so good when it comes to their close relations. Why did you write about that kind of man?